Hello and welcome to this video lecture. For this video lecture, we're going to be discussing resumes. And I hope in this lecture to help you understand what resumes are, how they fit into the job search, and how you can do a good job with a resume and how you can run into some issues with resumes. Additionally, I will be bringing in resources where I agree with some of the things the resources say, and in some cases, I actually don't. That should emphasize to you that, and as I will say throughout this lecture, there isn't a one-size-fits-all for resumes. A resume should be as personal as you are, should be as individual as you are. So understand that what I say about resumes may work for me, and some of what I say may not work for you, and that is perfectly fine. You need a resume that fits you and what you're aiming to do. With that said, though, there are still some general guidelines that effectively apply to all resumes. So when we're looking at a resume, what is the purpose of the resume? It is to, as indicated here, it allows you, might be a better way to say it, to list your skills. So in theory, you're going to have your resume documenting your skills in a summary fashion. It's important to recognize that those skills are technical skills, and some of those skills are non-technical skills. So we as engineers, of course, typically focus on the technical skills, and that is important. You need to show whoever your possible future employer might be that you have the skills that they need, the technical skills that they need for you to do the job. With that said, technical skills typically break down into two general categories. You have your technical education and you have your technical training. And when I talk about technical training, some people might call that a trade type training. Let's start with technical education. So you've been going through the curriculum here at Cal Poly, and you have a good understanding of all of the classes that you've had to go through to get to this point. Your strength of materials, your fluid mechanics, your thermodynamics, heat transfer, etc. All of those classes. That is your technical education. What does a technical education mean versus technical training? Well, technical education has, if we've done our jobs right, has changed how you think, how you approach solving problems, how you think about solving problems, how you decompose a problem. You have fundamentally changed through your technical education how you view the world, how you think about the world, and how you will approach working on a particular problem or a particular project. So the best evidence for that, of course, is think back to your freshman self versus where you are now. If your freshman self could see you now, hopefully your freshman self would be, wow, I'm almost a completely different person. And that's the whole point of a technical education, is we've changed how you are thinking about things, how you are approaching things. It's a fundamental change. On the other hand, technical training or trade type training is exactly that. It's just providing you skills without necessarily having a fundamental change in how you approach the world. So unlike technical education, where we're talking broad brushstrokes of stress analysis, broad brushstrokes of thermal analysis, technical training is very specific, very focused, and isn't very broadly applicable in most cases. Thermal analysis, almost every engineering project is going to involve some kind of thermal considerations. On the other hand, for technical training, you could choose to use SolidWorks to go ahead and solid model a particular component. You could choose Pro E. You could choose AutoCAD. You could choose a variety of different applications to model exactly the same part. And so, and depending on which one you use, other folks who know that application can work with that part in the future. But if you give that particular solid model to somebody who doesn't know the application, let's say SolidWorks doesn't know SolidWorks, and you give them that solid model in SolidWorks, they may not be able to do anything with it because everything was done specifically in SolidWorks. And so you can see, whereas your education, it applies across all projects, the training is very focused, is very specific, and is only good for the particular application or the particular potentially computer programming language that you're involved with. So when we talk about a resume and we talk about these two forms of technical knowledge, generally we handle those two forms differently and separately. You will generally list out, as I'll discuss here in a moment, you'll list out what you did for your technical education, your engineering education, separately and differently than you will for the trade type training, where you were focusing on a specific application like MATLAB, maybe even getting even deeper into MATLAB and just talking about Simulink, or SolidWorks or ANSYS, talking about those very specific applications, and those will generally be handled separately. So when we're looking at summarizing your skills, not only are you trying to summarize your technical skills, but we also generally bring to the workplace non-technical skills. And understand that the whole point of the resume is to give a prospective employer an understanding of what we bring, what capabilities and skills and skill sets we bring to a particular position. So when we're talking about non-technical skills, those can be leadership skills, those can be organizational skills, those can be relational skills. And so those particular skills are not technical. Leading a group isn't necessarily a technical function. You're not deriving equations to figure out how to lead the group, or at least not ordinarily. So you can see that nonetheless, though, before I move on, nonetheless, those are important skills to have, because clearly somebody has to lead a group. Somebody has to make sure a project is moving along at a proper pace in order to get it done on time. And so those are skills that also need to be documented and conveyed in a resume. So generally, though, people understand that there is a difference between the technical skills and the non-technical skills. And so often those skills will be, or documenting the places where those skills are documented will be broken out into different areas. And so we'll see that, of course, in the near future. Why, though, and this is quite appropriate, why would we be interested in even having a resume? Why is having a resume a part of the job hunting process? Please understand that, again, this is in theory, this is how the resume should be used. And for the most part, it really is used in this way. So, we'll talk about how things have kind of changed a little bit, but in general, it is truly used in this way, where a particular employer needs some particular function to be done at their company. They know that they need somebody to do X, Y, or Z. Let's say they know they need somebody to do a thermal analysis on a particular component, on maybe a printed wiring board. So what they will do is they will go out, they will collect resumes, they'll post a position, they'll collect resumes, they'll collect applications and things like that. And they'll look through those resumes and they will see who submits a resume associated generally with an application, who submits a resume that says thermal analysis. And so then they'll say, okay, we're looking for thermal analysts. Here's somebody that knows thermal analysis. The two match up. Let's bring them in, bring that person in, and let's have an interview with them and see if what they know about thermal analysis is what we need for thermal analysis. And you might ask, well, hey, thermal analysts, why not? Everything's the same, right? Well, probably not. You know, if you have somebody that knows how to do a thermal analysis of a turbojet, that skill or their experience and their skill sets probably won't match up very well with doing a thermal analysis on a printed wiring board. Two very different, even though the underlying physics is the same. Heat transfers because of a temperature difference, right? I mean, that's what heat transfer says. The two applications are so vastly different that the skills and skill sets may not be that transferable between those two positions. So that's why they're going to interview folks, because they're going to say, okay, great, you know thermal analysis. Do you really know what you're doing for our particular application? So generally, employers are going to be looking at resumes in that particular light. They're going to be saying, we have needs in our company. People are coming in saying they would like to have a job. We need to match the right person with the right position. And that's what the resume allows them to do. And that's why you list off your skills in the resume, because then that matching process can be made. One thing that I want to emphasize is that it's important to be very truthful when it comes to, and I shouldn't say truthful, that's not quite the right word, but you'll see what I'm talking about here in a moment. To be very, well, honest, maybe very honest about your skills. Because when you are looking at matching yourself to, or a potential employer is looking to match you with a particular position, or you're matching yourself through the application process, you want to make sure you're a good match just as much as the prospective employer wants to make sure that you're a good match. To see why that's the case, let's kind of look at a counter example. Let's say that we have a mechanical engineer that really is interested in stress analysis. They're very good at stress analysis. They understand it inside and out, at least from an academic perspective, because they're going to soon be a new grad engineer. And they really weren't that keen on thermal analysis. They didn't, i.e. heat transfer. They really didn't resonate with it. They didn't like it. And they just kind of somehow managed to scrape by with, getting an okay grade in their heat transfer class. But they want to get a job. So they go ahead and write a resume. They see a thermal position out there, a thermal analyst position out there, and they're like, hey, I might as well, right? And they go ahead and put a bunch of stuff in their resume, touching on just a few things that they may have done for thermal design and things like that. But because maybe they're good at writing resumes, it just sounds amazing. It sounds like they were born to be and always wanted to be a thermal analyst. So the folks in the company see this resume, they go, wow, this person's interested in thermal analysis. Wow, look at all this amazing stuff they did in school, for their projects and things like that. Let's go ahead and bring them on in. Maybe they manage to make it through the interview, because if they're that good at writing a resume, maybe they do a very good job in interviews too. And now they've landed themselves this great job in thermal analysis that they are going to do nothing but hate for the rest of their life. And understand that they're setting themselves up for the rest of their life to be a thermal analyst. Maybe they'll grow to like it. Maybe they won't. Is it really worth the risk? Because the last thing you want to do is to spend all this time with your engineering education and everything else just to get put in a position that you don't like. And you're not going to be good at what you do. The company is going to figure out that either you don't like it or you're not good at it, and you may not last there very long, and that's not going to be good either. And you're just setting yourself up for failure just so that you can get that paycheck earlier. That makes no sense. So it's really important that when you are writing your resume, and this is getting to the last bullet here, even though in theory you're conveying these skills so that hopefully your employer can see, prospective employer can see what you're interested in and what you're good at, and you can match yourself with the position just as much as your prospective employer can match you with that position. You are also trying to sell yourself. And so that's where, so in theory, you're trying to match up these skills, but in practice, you're trying to sell yourself. You're trying to say, hey, there are maybe a bunch of thermal analysts out there. I better make myself look better than all of those other thermal analysts. So that way I have a leg up in trying to get that interview and get my foot in the door. So this is where it's important to be honest, because you're trying to sell yourself, you're trying to put yourself in the best light you can, and that's perfectly fine. You should put yourself in the best light you possibly can, but you need to do it honestly. You don't want to embellish. You don't want to say stuff that really isn't quite there, right? Maybe you were tangentially involved in a thermal project, but you really were just kind of doing a stress side of that thermal project, but you heard enough thermal words bounced around that you could write it, you could put that in your resume. You don't want to do that. Sure, you might get a job earlier than maybe your other classmates or the other folks you graduated with, but you may just hate that job. So why do it? So understand, go ahead, sell yourself, but be honest with how you sell yourself. Put yourself in a glowing light, but put yourself in a glowing light for those things that you know and really love, and you are willing to do when you get out into industry, and you will be good at doing. So make sure that you do this blend between a skills summary and selling yourself. You don't want to oversell yourself, but you also don't want to undersell yourself. And in some cases, we as engineers are pretty bad about selling ourselves. So, nonetheless, though, I want to give you that word of caution. Don't oversell yourself. Make sure that when you put something down, it really reflects your interests and your capabilities. Because let's say that you aren't that good at thermal analysis, you're really much better at stress, but as a new grad engineer, an employer might be like, well, you kind of know both. And maybe they bring you in as a thermal analyst, even though your resume was geared more toward stress analysis. What does that mean? That means that the employer isn't going to expect you to be able to hit the ground running immediately if they know that you're kind of more geared towards stress analysis than thermal analysis. And so they know that based on your resume, based on what you said, that you're going to take more training, you're going to take more time to get up to speed. And maybe eventually they're even going to say, okay, we need you as a thermal analyst now. We know you want to be a stress analyst. We'll get you over there eventually. And they're going to already have it in their mind that you're just kind of helping them out right now to get them past whatever issues they're currently having. and then they'll go ahead and move you over to a different organization, a different group later, where maybe the fit's a bit better, but they just don't need you there right now. So whereas if you go in and again, you really like stress analysis, but your resume was written for this thermal position, they're going to expect you to hit the ground running immediately. They're going to expect you to be interested in it immediately. They're going to be expected, or they're going to expect you to stay in that group for forever because they think they had a great fit because of what you put in your resume, even though the resume was just written for the position, not for what you really wanted to do. So it's important for you to balance that selling yourself and making you look great, and also having that skills, the skills summary in there, as well as an understanding of what you're interested in. If the resume itself was just, so let's be honest, if the resume itself was just a skills summary, then that's all we'd have to do is we wouldn't have these beautiful thick pieces of paper with all this writing on it. You just have an electronic list of your skills. The prospective employer would have an electronic list of skills, and we would have some algorithm put the two of you together, and kind of that's where things are going now. But nonetheless, you can kind of see that this idea of bringing in the selling yourself makes the resume more complicated than just a dry list of skills, both technical and non-technical. So with that, it's again important to recognize that even though we have our technical skills, some of those technical skills are going to be related to your engineering education. Others are going to be based more in kind of a training type environment. And then you will even have your non-technical skills that are a potentially completely separate section on your resume. Really, the reason you are putting those on your resume is you are saying to a prospective employer, this is what I bring. I bring my engineering education, I bring my training, I bring my non-technical based skills to your company. Because some companies are going to be looking for just a purely technical person, and that's all they want that person to ever do is analyze, analyze, analyze. And some people, that's all they want to do is analyze, 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 which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. But other companies are going to be looking for people who are good technically and will come in and do the engineering that they need to have done initially, analysis, design, or otherwise. But then they are going to expect that person to grow into other positions, such as management positions, either project management or line/personnel management. And so that's where this whole idea of these non-technical skills come in, where they can say, because almost never are you initially going to go into a leadership position. You need to understand what the business is all about. You need to understand what the company is doing before you can get into a leadership position. But nonetheless, with that non-technical side, they want to see that, and they want to see that as you're coming in, because they can say, oh, okay, this person is going to grow in our company and is going to eventually move potentially into leadership positions. And they're going to want to know that right at the outset. So it's important for you to document, again, technical capabilities as well as these non-technical capabilities. And you need to do it in a way where you can sell yourself, but you don't do it overly so that you're setting a level of expectation that you're just not going to be able to meet. And that is true not only when you're coming out as a new grad engineer, but even as you are gaining experience and maybe looking for other positions or moving to other companies. You always want to have that level of expectation set appropriately so that they aren't expecting you to do something when you get into the position that you can't do because you might have just oversold yourself a little too much. You definitely don't want that. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at some particular resumes, and I have specifically found examples that are aimed toward new grad engineers. So in particular, I found these at University of Colorado Boulder's website. And for the most part, I like how they have structured this particular template for a new grad engineer. First and foremost, you need to, so let's go ahead and cover it. So first and foremost, you need to have your contact information. Now, this may seem a little bit redundant because you may have submitted your resume with an application, and that application is going to have your name on it and your contact information and everything else. And you might be tempted to say, oh, okay, well, why should I bother to have my name and contact information again on my resume when it's already on the application and I'm submitting my resume with that application? Well, understand how things work in industry. It is quite possible that the resume, maybe it's an electronic application, an electronic submission of your resume. Somebody may print out your resume and they may not print out the application, and they may start passing around packets of resumes. And that's great because your resume is getting a lot more exposure, but as they're flipping through that packet and they hit your resume and you look like the perfect candidate, and yet your name's not on there and your contact information isn't on there, since your resume has been separated from the application, nobody can tie your resume to your name, to your contact information. So regardless of whether it seems redundant or not, always, always, always make sure that every document you produce and submit to a particular company has your name at a minimum, and preferably even has a little bit of contact information on there so that if it gets separated from everything else and somebody sees it in isolation, they're still able to figure out who it belongs to and then contact you. As you can see in this next section, here you have a personal profile. Now, Colorado is saying that this is an optional section, and I agree with them. Especially for a new grad engineer, it's going to be difficult to have some kind of meaningful personal profile. Nonetheless, it is a nice way to introduce yourself to, or having a lead-in section is a nice way to introduce yourself to whoever is reading your resume. At the front end of a resume, I've seen three distinctly different sections. I've seen skill summaries, and that's what I have on my resume. I've seen objectives, and here, and this is the first time I've seen this, is a personal profile, which is a little bit of a blend or a little bit of a different take on an objective. Skills summaries might be a little difficult for you at this point, being a new grad engineer, unless you manage to get considerable technical experience either before you came in to school or while you were at school, you somehow managed to get a lot of experience. If you did, then go ahead and do a skills summary. But that's exactly what a skills summary is supposed to do, is it's supposed to say, okay, these are the skills that I would bring to a particular position. And for a new grad student, it's hard to say that because you are still such a generalist. You can go any direction, and generally employers know you can go in any direction. The reason I am comparing and contrasting the stress analyst position with the thermal analyst position is that's exactly what happened to me. I was supposed to go into my first technical job as a stress analyst, and I actually, first day on the job, got turned into effectively a design engineer with a strong project management component. And so they viewed me, because that's what they needed at the time, they viewed me as a complete generalist, and sure enough, I was. I was able to function completely well in that position, even though I hadn't expressed any interest in that position. I had expressed interest in other positions. And and yet the need wasn't there. So they put me in a position where they had a need, and everything worked out fine. So anyway, understand though that you really, other than having a good technical background in a wide variety of fields, you're not bringing specific skill sets to the job market yet. And so the skills summary might be a little bit hard for you to put together in a meaningful way. And we'll talk more about the skills summary here because, of course, I want this discussion to be a bit more, a bit broader than just what you're going to be doing immediately after school. So for you as a potentially new grad engineer with limited experience, you're going to either go the personal profile route or you'll go the objective route. Personal profile might be a little bit better because it, as is indicated here, it's saying, okay, this is, I'm bringing enthusiasm and motivation to the workplace. Unfortunately, that's about all you're going to be able to say. And also, unfortunately, that's just about what every new grad engineer is going to be saying, is I'm bringing my technical, my general technical knowledge and my enthusiasm to the workplace. And you can either say that as a personal profile, that's what I'm going to be doing, or you can say it as an objective that you want to build on your already broad, but detail, you're already broad, but decent knowledge of technical phenomena and your enthusiasm to develop skill sets that will then be very meaningful for your employer in the future, right? So that's another way of essentially saying the same thing. One is saying that you're going to build on, the other one saying, hey, this is what I'm bringing. So in this intro section, you can do a little, you can do a variety of different things. One thing I wouldn't do is they have 2 bullets there, especially for a new grad engineer. There should be no need for 2 bullets. It takes up more room, and it looks like you're a little bit defocused. So you want to keep things very focused, unless there is a really compelling reason to bring in more things to the personal profile or the objective. So generally, I usually have 2 lines for an objective. I would also say the same thing, 2 lines for a personal profile. I believe for my skills summary, I kept it to 3 lines, and that was after 13, now 20 plus years of experience. It's supposed to be short. It's supposed to be very, very focused when you're looking at those statements. You don't want to have some rambling thing. If it doesn't seem to work for you, and we'll talk a little bit more about working for you here in a moment, if it doesn't seem to work for you, then don't even bother to have that particular section on your resume. So only put it if you think that it's going to be meaningful to you. And again, we'll talk a bit more about what makes it meaningful and what doesn't. So if it's going to be meaningful, include it. If it isn't going to be meaningful, then don't. And understand that this idea of meaningful or not is also going to be influenced not just by your resume, but also the hordes of other resumes that a company is going to be looking at from from different new grad engineers. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to the other sections, and then we'll talk about the construction of the resume overall and what you're trying to do with it. So moving on now, you can see the next section, and we'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit later. The next section they have is education. And so here it's relatively simple. You're going ahead and you're listing out what you have done from an academic perspective, what degrees you have, where you have them. Here they have minor concentrations. That's perfectly fine. You can have minors and things. You can have second majors. Whatever seems to make sense in that particular area. But honestly, that area isn't going to really force you out of the envelope, out of the box very much, because pretty much you just list things and you're set to go. So you can't really distinguish yourself too much. The one note that they have on here is if your GPA is more than 2.7, listed. If it's less than 2.7, then maybe you leave it off, because you want to make sure that if you have really good stuff in the rest of your resume, you don't want whoever's looking at your resume to see your GPA first. If it isn't super good, see your GPA first and never get to or never pay attention to the rest of the resume. So if your GPA is not doing quite so well, you may want to leave it off so that you can generate that spark of interest with whatever else is on the resume. And then at some point later, you will definitely get into a discussion of the GPA. But at that point, they have already decided that you're somebody that they're interested in. And so then they're going to be more willing to listen to what's going on and listen to, reasons why your GPA may not be quite as good as other people's. All right. Were you working? Did you have to work part-time throughout your entire academic career at Cal Poly, in addition to being a full-time student to keep financial aid coming in? I mean, there are a lot of extenuating circumstances, and if you never get to that second part of the conversation, they're never going to know why your GPA may not be as good as it could have been. So next, let's go ahead and bring in parts of that other discussion that we were having. So here, Colorado lists this off as optional subsections: selected coursework, honors, and awards. Let's address those individually. So selected coursework, here's where I think, and I don't really see these as optional, but you don't have to include them. As I said, this is all up to you. So for selected coursework, that shows where you have gone above and beyond the standard mechanical engineering curriculum. So when we're looking at engineering curricula across the United States, pretty much everybody that gets a mechanical engineering degree is going to know stress analysis. They're going to know, or they're going to have taken mechanics of materials. They're going to have taken heat transfer. They're going to have taken fluid mechanics. They're going to have taken thermodynamics, dynamics, statics, etc. So you know that pretty much everybody is going to have taken those classes if they have a mechanical engineering degree. But for some of your tech electives, that's where you're able to start to say, this is what I have done that is different and separate from other mechanical engineers. And you can start to give yourself a little bit of a unique flavor in your resume based on the specific coursework that you have taken that is different than every other mechanical engineering curriculum that's out there. Not only will your tech electives allow you to distinguish yourself, but also specific threads in our curriculum that are maybe more strongly emphasized in our curriculum versus other curricula, even though they may be required classes. Those are things that you can advertise here. Because remember, the prospective employers are reading resumes from across the nation. And so if our curriculum gives you a little bit of a competitive advantage in a particular area, namely our dynamic system modeling, measurements / mechatronics, and control theory sequence, that's a pretty robust sequence for our particular curriculum. So you may want to emphasize that in this section of selected coursework, where you can say, okay, this is where we're a little above and beyond the regular courses that folks have taken in, if they went through other mechanical engineering programs. That will give you an opportunity, again, to start to pull away from the standard basic resume from folks who went through other programs. And one of the things that you're trying to do with your resume, so I said there are a couple things that you're trying to do here. One of the things that you're trying to do with your resume is you're trying to stand apart from the crowd. That's really easy to do once you have 15, 20 years of experience, because that experience is so unique to you that there's nobody else that comes with that experience, that particular blend of experiences. And so at that point, people who are reading resumes for folks that have 15 or 20 years of experience, they're looking at those resumes completely differently than they are for folks who just graduated, because it's very difficult for new grad engineers to prove that they're different than other new grad engineers. And so one of your objectives with the resume, with your resume, is you're trying to emphasize how you are different than everybody else out there who's graduating in the same year from a mechanical engineering program than you are. So how you are different from them. And so that gets us back to, again, that personal profile. If you can't come up with a personal profile or an objective that is going to be distinctly different than everybody else, then maybe it's not worth putting it in there. If it isn't helping build that argument that you're bringing something different to the position, then maybe it's better just to say, okay, you know, all I'm doing is writing the same, hey, I'm bringing my educational background and my enthusiasm to the job. And maybe at that point, we just say, forget it, don't put it on there. So, but I'll leave it up to you. That's one of the things, is that this is your resume. It's your personal, how should I say it, introduction to a prospective employer. And if you really like to have it, even if it's generic and you really like to have it there, okay, by all means, put it. So again, it's up to you. Additionally, here they say optional honors and awards. So we covered the selected coursework. They say honors and awards. I don't see that as being optional. If you have honors, if you have awards, that shows a particular level of achievement that is above and beyond what the normal mechanical engineering student has done. You should include it. Because again, one of the things that you're trying to do is you're trying to distinguish yourself from all the other mechanical engineering new grads. And so if they see, oh, this person has honors, this person has awards, they're going to be, well, that's kind of better than this other resume over here that looks maybe just as good, but there are no honors and awards. So they may be like, okay, well, this means something. Because understand that even if somebody or two people have the same GPA, they may not have the same class standing in their respective institutions. And so if somebody's coming in with a 3.3 with honors and awards, and another person from another institution is coming in with a 3.3 with no honors and awards, what does that mean? It means that, you know, that 3.3 at one institution probably means more than the 3.3 at that other institution. And that's what hiring engineers are going to be looking for. They're going to be looking for something that tells them, hey, what's the relative value of this GPA? So by all means, if you have honors, if you have awards, include them. Now, don't go down to little teeny awards and crazy things like that, where, you know, you happen to be, you know, the nice person for the week or something like that in a certain club competition. Yeah, you don't need to get into that. But I mean, if they're meaningful, definitely include them. As you can also see, as I indicated before, your technical sections kind of break into two sections. You have the technical section associated with your education, and then you have the technical section associated with the training, those trade skills. So here you can include different programs, different applications that you know or you've been exposed to. Now, it's kind of important, though, to really reflect on these properly. Have you just been exposed to them, or do you have a greater level of proficiency associated with that particular application. So is it possible that you worked with SolidWorks for an entire semester? Well, if you have and you have a decent understanding of SolidWorks, you can say, I have a working knowledge of SolidWorks. Now, that is something that is missing in this particular uh, resume template or sample, is that there is no self-evaluation about the person's knowledge of a particular application. And I would encourage you potentially to have that self-evaluation, because again, just like in your engineering education, you don't want to say that you are great at and you love thermal analysis when you despise it and you love stress analysis. You definitely don't want to do that. You don't want to do the same thing here. You don't want somebody to think that you are, because here they've listed AutoCAD and SolidWorks, maybe you designed one rod in AutoCAD and for whatever reason, because you had to, and then you spent an entire semester doing everything else in SolidWorks. Here, there is no indication which one you're better at, which one you've had a greater exposure to. And so somebody looking at this resume, maybe they use AutoCAD at their particular company and they'd be like, wow, you listed AutoCAD, great. Let's go ahead and bring you on in. They bring you in and you're like, okay, how many rods do you want to design? Because that's all I know how to do in AutoCAD, right? Not going to be a good way to start at that company. So I would encourage you to have a little bit of a self-assessment. You can say that you've been exposed to AutoCAD if you don't really have a great knowledge of it. You've seen the interface, you've worked with the interface a little bit, but beyond that, you really don't know a lot. Whereas maybe for SolidWorks, you would say that you have a working knowledge of SolidWorks. Now, one thing I would never do for a new grad engineer, unless you're a really special one, I would never say that you are expert in or proficient in one of these particular applications, because understand that when you say you're expert or proficient, the general rule of thumb that was out there when I was in industry is expert or proficient, and even then maybe I wouldn't use it, but nonetheless, is that you have 2,000 hours under your belt using that particular application. And when I'm saying using it, I'm not like, okay, half my time was spent doing something and then my other half of the time was spent on that application and I did that for 2,000 hours. No, that's 1,000 hours. So it's 2,000 hours on that application. Then you can say that you're proficient at it or expert at it. And understand, what does 2,000 hours generally equate to? It equates to 1 year full-time doing nothing but working on that application. So unless you're coming in with some special skills or getting out of Cal Poly with some special skills, generally those skills having come from outside of Cal Poly, you probably wouldn't want to say expert or proficient. You definitely want to kind of keep it at working knowledge. Okay. So nonetheless, that's what I would do in this technical section, is definitely list out technical skills, but say if you have a working knowledge or you've been exposed to or something like that, so that when you are presenting your resume to somebody, they don't think they're getting something that they're not getting, right? And here, just listing this out, they may think they're getting something and they're not getting it. They think they're getting somebody who knows AutoCAD, when all somebody has done was designed one cylindrical rod in AutoCAD and they don't know anything more. So again, be careful, be honest, be careful, because understand you are, even though you want to show, hey, I know some of this, you don't want to put yourself in a glowing light when you really shouldn't be putting yourself in a glowing light, because you're then not setting the level of expectation appropriately. So that's where you need to be careful. Now, one of the things, as I said earlier, is that the resume, even though you are summarizing your skills, it is not just a list of skills, because everybody understands that there's a huge difference between having a skill and being able to put that skill into practice. And that's where the engineering experience section comes into play. There, you're saying, I have these skills, I know strength of materials, I know thermal analysis. Now, in the engineering experience section, you can say, I put this into practice. I took a look at uh, the temperature gradient across a particular printed wiring board. I was then able to take the thermal strains that were associated with that temperature gradient, and I was able to calculate the warping associated with that printed wiring board. And I showed why, because of that warping, that we were breaking solder joints for some particular chip that was soldered onto that board. And so then we were able to stiffen the board, and that stopped the chip from breaking off, something along those lines. Here you are bringing in this idea of, you're taking those skills and not only using them, but potentially blending those skills, where you're looking at the mechanics of the materials, you're looking at the thermal environment, you're looking at all these things to be able to solve real problems. Here you want to definitely be concise, though. You can see that especially in this third bullet, and I know that third bullet really is just there as, listing off a bunch of stuff. You'd never want a third bullet that long, or a bullet as long as that third bullet. You want to keep them hopefully to one line, at most 2 lines per bullet. Keep the language clear, keep it concise, but still make it meaningful. And I'll show you why I say make it meaningful here in a moment. Okay, this is a great place for you to really shine. Let a prospective employer know what you can do. Again, this is a little difficult for most new grad engineers. If you're lucky and you have an internship, or you actually had a job while you were going to Cal Poly, or before you got into Cal Poly, by all means list it here. I want to emphasize, though, because for most new grad engineers, well, I shouldn't say most, but some new grad engineers, they won't have had an internship, they won't have had a job, a summer job or a regular job, in which case then you can always go to your class projects. So don't hesitate to mention the class projects that you worked on, especially the more substantial ones that you might have come across in either mechatronics, measurements, controls, and or machine design. By all means, bring that in here, or in other classes, or club projects, or things like that. Don't hesitate to bring that in, but make sure that you really contributed to that project and you understand the aspects that you contributed to in that project. So don't just say, okay, well, I worked on a project, but boy, that was a really tough semester, so I kind of put in about an hour on the project each week, and other people were putting in 10 to 12 hours, and then you list that project here, because nothing falls flat faster than asking somebody about a project they have listed on their resume, and all they can do is kind of hum and haw about it without giving you any details or anything else. An engineer is going to figure out pretty quickly that you didn't do anything on that project, and you definitely don't want them coming away with that impression. So if you didn't work on that project, even though you got through the class, you don't want to list it, because people are going to start asking all sorts of interesting and engaging questions about that project, and if you can't answer them, that will be a bit of a disaster. So here is your chance, because these other areas, both the classes, awards, and technical skills, you're not really going to be able to paint those in much of a selective light, because those are just, you either took the class or you didn't. You either have training on a particular platform or you don't. You either have an award or you don't. Here's where you can start to paint yourself in a favorable light. But again, make sure you paint yourself in the appropriate light. So you don't want to overstate what you've done, because again, if you have overstated what you've done, they may bring you in, put you in a position where there's more responsibility, and you're just not ready for it, and that wouldn't be a good thing. don't worry. If they put you in a position where there isn't as much responsibility, you can clearly grow into that position later once you've had a chance to figure out what's going on. Additionally, leadership experience. You're not just bringing your technical knowledge, you're bringing leadership as well, potentially. So by all means, go ahead and have a section that brings in these non-technical things. Here, though, I would tend to say, I don't like how they broke this out into two different sections. Now, you might like it, and that's fine. If you do, run with it. Unfortunately, with the way they did this, where it's kind of leadership experience and then additional experience, that's exactly how somebody's going to read it. They're going to read that additional experience, even though it's non-technical. Well, here I guess they were a tutor, so maybe that would have been technical. People are going to read that as the additional experience not holding the same value as the leadership experience. So I would tend to avoid this breaking up of these sections in this way, where it's like, I have this leadership experience and then I got this other stuff. Okay, so I would tend to do something a little bit different, have a single section. Maybe you have the engineering experience and then you have non-engineering or non-technical experience, or non-technical / leadership experience. And then that way you're not putting, or somebody won't assess it as you're putting a relative value on that experience. Because let's be honest, anything you do gives you experience, and that experience is valuable. So make sure that you don't, either intentionally or unintentionally, diminish the value associated with something that you've done. So here I disagree with this template or this sample a little bit. Student affiliations, that's great. If you have been a part of student organizations, clubs, etc., by all means, you should list it. Additionally, if you've held some kind of position, whether formal or informal, preferably formal, such as you were an officer for an organization, then you should list it. And then anything else that you have that you can list off that is relevant for the job, go ahead and include that. Here they have a language skills section. That could be beneficial. That may not be beneficial. So let's discuss, so we discussed objective number one, which is you want to distinguish yourself from all the other new grad engineers, new grad mechanical engineers out there. Here is objective number two that maybe is even more important than objective number one, which is you are making an argument with your resume. And that argument is, I am the right person for a particular position. And so please give me a chance to interview with you so that you can see I'm the right person. That's really the thread that you need, the argument that your resume is trying to make and the thread that should run through your resume. And so everything should be pointing to that you are the right candidate for that particular position. So when we look at that, if something doesn't add, whether it be the objective or the personal profile, whether it be the experience you're emphasizing, the engineering experience you're emphasizing, or non-technical experience you're emphasizing, if something there doesn't add to that thread, then you shouldn't include it. So if you know that you're dealing with an international corporation that has a strong business presence in South America, maybe it makes sense to put that you have skills in Spanish. If, on the other hand, you're talking about a company that is going to be in the middle of Nebraska and has a branch office in Canada, it may not make sense to have that skill set listed there. Maybe it doesn't hurt, and it's simple enough, it's quick enough that you might be able to get away with having it on there and nobody's going to really care that much. But nonetheless, if it really isn't adding to the thread that you want running through your resume, maybe you don't include it for that particular company if you don't think that it's going to add to it. Additionally, even for the multinational company that has a bunch of branch offices in South America, you may need to be a little careful with the language skills, because they may read that as, ooh, guess what? We can send you to South America. And maybe you have a wife, maybe you have children here in the United States, and you don't want to be shipped off to South America. It may not make sense to include that in there unless you know that they need that language skill here in your local area in the United States. Because again, you don't want to get that seed in your prospective employer's head that they can be shipping you off. Okay, so make sure that you understand when you're putting something on your resume, make sure you understand how the prospective employer is going to receive it and what they're going to think. So with that, again, let's summarize a little bit with the resume. For a new grad engineer, a resume is going to do what? Well, first of all, a resume is really the whole point of the resume is to make that argument that you are the best, if not one of the best candidates for a particular position. For a new grad, part of what you have to do to make that argument is you have to show your own unique self in that resume. So you need to make sure that that comes through. And then in addition, you need to have that thread through your resume, making that argument that you are the best candidate. Let's go ahead though and see how you can distinguish yourself even a little bit more. And here we'll get a little away from the resume. And let's go to, again, this is from Boulder. So you can include what is called a cover letter. Notice that, again, the cover letter has your contact information on it, absolutely crucial. Because again, your cover letter might get separated from your resume and from your application. And here, where, so everybody understands the resume is going to be general. It's going to be something that you're giving to multiple companies. Here, the cover letter allows you to target a specific company. And so you can see what they're doing here with this sample cover letter is they are saying, hey, I am interested in your particular company because of X, Y, and Z. That is very powerful because it's allowing you an opportunity to make a stronger connection to that company than your resume could ever make. Because remember, the resume, the most you can do is just maybe mention in the objective that you want to work for that company, but then that's starting to look, just a little too focused, and people might get a little skeptical. It also allows you to amplify. It also allows you to amplify some of your experience and show how that experience that appears on your resume applies more directly to that company. And so this is a really powerful combination of having the cover letter introduce the resume in a detailed fashion for that company, and then having the resume reinforce it through listing off the skill sets that you've developed, and then showing how that reinforces what you have in the cover letter. So the two work together. Now here, we'll discuss this in a second, but here things can backfire just a little bit. So you need to be a little careful with the cover letter, but nonetheless, it gives you a powerful means to go ahead and say, okay, I listed this off on my resume. It was a one line item or 2-line item thing. Now let's go ahead and show how that is going to relate to the company and what the company is doing. Last but not least, you can go ahead and have a nice sign off that, again, introduces yourself a little bit more. Here you can see they went ahead and included the contact information again, and allows you to tie back into your interest in applying to that company. Okay, so, and I will also be honest, most people are just going to go ahead and submit a resume. Many fewer people are going to submit a cover letter. So just by virtue of submitting a cover letter, you are going to immediately start to stand out from the competition. So there is something that, so not only is it really powerful and allows you to really uh, demonstrate where your experience is going to work with what that company needs, it also shows an additional level of effort that you've gone through in order to uh, make that connection with that company. So that's very powerful. Now, how can it backfire a little bit? Let's say, so we have Chip B. Uffalo. Coloradans have a pretty good sense of humor if you happen to know what a Buffalo chip is. So anyway, with that, so let's say that Chip here has written this great cover letter, and then you're a prospective hiring manager in an engineering company, and you flip over to the resume, and on the resume you see that Chip has a 2.75 GPA. Not a disaster, not outstanding, but then you go back to this cover letter and you see this amazing experience, right? You're like, look at these really, really cool things that Chip has done. So there is a disconnect. Why has Chip done these amazing, amazing things, but yet doesn't have the greatest GPA? Maybe there are other explanations, but one thing that somebody's going to have in their heads as a possibility is that maybe Chip is easily distracted. Maybe Chip likes to work on things outside of the formal channels and doesn't spend the time and effort that he needs in the formal, assuming Chip is a he, that he needs in the formal channels, right? So you might see that Chip is a distractible type of guy. So even though this sounds great, when it doesn't pair up with and match up with what's in the resume, it's a little bit of a warning sign, a little bit of a red flag. And so you need to be careful with your cover letter because it needs to be consistent. Now imagine if Chip had a 3.75 rather than a 2.75. Chip has a 3.75. Chip has done all this amazing stuff outside of school. Okay, now we're starting to talk, right? Chip is starting to sound like a pretty amazing individual. And so maybe that's going to work well and work in Chip's favor for possibly getting into that position. And in addition, Chip actually wrote a cover letter. So the cover letter is giving examples of where Chip has gone above and beyond, and by virtue of writing a cover letter, Chip has already again gone above and beyond. So that reinforces that idea that this person is going above and beyond. So understand that you should write the cover letter. You should have a good resume. The two need to work together, but make sure that there isn't something in there that could give somebody pause. Even though it looks great, if it indicates a disconnect between the two, it could be a little problematic. With that said, and there are some other points that I want to make, but to help me make those points, let's go ahead and go over to a web page that I found. So let's go here. And before we go to that web page, let's go to this web page. So this is a web page from Indeed. 6 rules for resume writing. I'm going to cover some of them and what I like about some of them. I'm going to cover some stuff on this webpage I don't like. First thing that I saw that I didn't exactly like, well, let's actually cover the first thing that I did like. So University of Colorado, they had the educational history first and they had the professional, quote unquote, professional history second. I kind of like what Indeed did here. If you have a strong professional history or even just a moderate one, go ahead and do that first because that's unique. That's going to show that you're different than everybody else. I like that they had this first and then they put the educational history second. So I kind of like how they did that. Now, if you don't have a strong professional history, maybe you go ahead and reverse the two. Maybe that's fine. If all you have are school projects, then maybe it's okay to have the educational history first because then that rolls right into your student projects that you have listed off in the resume. Really, it's up to you. You need to figure out which makes sense to put first and which makes sense to put next. So I kind of like this, but again, depending on your own personal background, you may need to, you may want to go the bolder approach, or you may want to go with this Indeed approach. But you can kind of see why it might be better to have the professional history first if you can. One thing I don't like at all about this are the hobbies and interests. Unless those hobbies and interests relate directly to what the company is doing, I wouldn't include it. The reason for that is it kind of, well, not kind of, it distracts, right? Remember, you're trying to keep a thread, a nice consistent thread through your resume. And anything in there that doesn't add to that thread, you don't need to include it. So if you enjoy hiking, I, as potentially a hiring engineering manager, I don't need to know that you like hiking. That is something that is unimportant to me. I don't care about it. Sure, maybe it shows, oh, okay, I'm a person, I have interests outside of work. Why would I care about your interests outside of work? I want you there working. I don't want you there thinking about your other interests. So please understand that it could kind of backfire if you put your hobbies and interests. Now, one thing that you might be tempted to do is say, oh, but wait, I am great at working on my own outside projects. So they're very similar to what I would be doing at work, and so kind of relates to that, but I do this outside of work. Well, maybe that's okay, but you also run the risk of maybe starting to look a little two-dimensional, too much two-dimensional, where you're just technical on top of technical. That's all you do. Maybe that is all you do. Nothing wrong with it, but do you necessarily want to convey that to a hiring manager where it's just they might start to think of you as a two-dimensional person rather than a three-dimensional person having broad interests and everything else? So generally, I would say unless there's a really compelling reason, stay away from hobbies and interests. I don't think that makes a lot of sense for engineers. Now, understand Indeed's writing this for all sorts of different disciplines, and maybe that makes sense in other disciplines. I don't think that makes sense for us. Here, I just want to cover primarily what we have here. We've already covered a lot of this, but there are a couple things that I want to emphasize. So relevant engineering degree or educational degrees, obviously, and we already covered that. Relevant work, obviously. Here's one thing that I want to emphasize, though, is volunteer experience. So you may not have a lot of professional experience, but maybe you have some volunteer experience, or maybe you're kind of thinking, oh, how do I get my resume to work out a little bit better? And I've been thinking about volunteering. Go volunteer for a month or two. Why not? And then, hopefully through that volunteer experience, you're going to be able to develop your skill sets and you're going to be able to include that on your resume. So that's something that you may want to think about, especially if the job market isn't looking so hot, right? People need volunteers and almost always need volunteers. And so if the job market isn't looking that great when you're graduating, maybe it makes more sense to go out and volunteer for a couple months and develop your skill sets, develop yourself, and then go ahead and, and do that while you're doing the job hunt. Contact information we already covered, and relevant skills and level of mastery we've already covered. So you can see that when you're looking at these resource sites, you can see that through the repetition of what we've discussed, what's important and what isn't. So here they're encouraging you to explore other resumes for inspiration. Absolutely, why wouldn't you? How do you learn or what's one of the most powerful ways to learn how to write well is to read well-written things, and then you get ideas, you get examples, you get inspiration, and then you start writing better yourself. Same thing with resumes. Go ahead, look at other resumes, see what people have done. Use as few words as possible. I completely agree. I actually kind of disagree with their example here, though, because here they say achieve 20% departmental cost savings by eliminating inefficiencies. Well, people define inefficiencies differently. Maybe they just went and laid off 20% of the people in the department, right? That's what you could interpret that second bullet, that second quote unquote more concise bullet as saying. Whereas here it says very clearly that expert budget management is what allowed you to arrive at that 20% reduction. I would include that in there. I think that makes sense because it wasn't you just going and laying people off or telling people not to buy copier paper and to use the copier less. It came about because you were focused on the budget, you understood where the money was going, and you were able to see, hey, we're wasting money here, we're wasting money there, and you were able to achieve a 20% reduction in cost. That's great. And so be careful, because if you go too concise, you can actually end up losing some of the strength that you might have had in the original statement. So be a little careful with that. Quantify your accomplishments. I agree. So here, one person is just saying, okay, I did one thing. Let's use a different example. Let's say that you improve productivity by 50%, right? So you can say, I implemented a variety of productivity improvement initiatives, and productivity increased by 50%, productivity increased substantially. Or you can say that productivity increased by 50%. Substantially, people are going to go, okay, what was substantially? 5%, 3%, 20%? What substantially? Whereas if you quantify it with that 50%, there's no question it was 50%. That's a substantial improvement in productivity. With that, however, you need to be careful, because make sure that you understand how it could be quantified or how it was quantified. So make sure you have a good justification for how you came up with that number, because the worst thing to do is to have somebody say, wow, you increased productivity by 50%. What does that mean? How was that productivity? What was the productivity that was improved? And so you need to know the metrics that were used and how they were used in coming up with that number. Because if you say, oh, well, yeah, I mean, it's just kind of 50%, 50%, people are going to be let down by that. They're going to be like, wow, this person doesn't even know the metrics that were used to come up with that 50%. And if you're coming up with a number like 50%, you better know how you came up with it. So then they're going to be like, what's this guy doing? Pulling our leg or something? So make sure you know the metrics. Make sure you are able to quantify those metrics so that people can believe that 50% that you came up with. So if you're going to quantify, make sure you understand how it was quantified, how you were able to quantify it. Use keywords, absolutely crucial. Because understand that, as I indicated before, in theory, the resume is just a list of skills. The prospective employer has a list of skills, and we could have an algorithm match the two up. Well, that's what's happening these days. So folks are going out looking at resumes using algorithms, and they are looking for particular keywords that the employers are interested in. And so make sure that if there are particular keywords that the industry you are in or you want to get in is using, make sure that as long as they're appropriate, that those keywords appear in your resume. So that way the algorithms can catch it. Crucial, crucial, crucial. Never have typos, misspellings, punctuation that's off, etc. when you have a resume or your cover letter, either one. Everything must be correct, because when you're looking at how important a resume is, If you are sloppy on your resume, what's an employer going to think? This resume is one of the most important documents this person has ever produced, and it's sloppy. When they come in and work for me, they're going to be potentially even sloppier. And I don't have the time or money to take care of that. So understand that having misspellings, having typos, a disaster when it comes to resumes. So make sure that the resume is good, that you've proofread it multiple times, there are no issues with it, everything's correct, and then you're set to go. One thing that I also want to discuss, and the last thing that I want to cover, actually I have it right here, is resume templates. I would be a little careful with resume templates because even though they may look nice, I think most people, and I would be included in that, I find these additional things, these additional sections and things like that relatively distracting. And so I would avoid going with anything that's relatively fancy that has these things on there, because unfortunately, it kind of causes two problems. Problem number one is that this particular format has different fields associated with it. Let's actually go with something that could even be a little bit worse. Here we go. We have a particular resume that has different fields associated with it. And if I have algorithms looking at resumes for me, the algorithms might pick up this initial set of fields, and it may completely miss the main set of fields that I was hoping that they would actually pick up. And so the algorithm might say, this person doesn't know anything, and just throw your resume out immediately because it just sees this list of things, and it can't put anything, it can't attach anything to it, any meaning to it. And so it might just throw your resume out. Additionally, and here you can see that they have an evaluation, but they've done the evaluation using these bars, these bar graphs. Again, we have another issue, which is how do you determine how long that bar is, right? When an engineer sees bars like this, they're going to be like, well, how are you one tick over from very good rather than just middle? How do you assess that? How did you come up with that number? Remember, we are engineers. We quantify things. We look at that and, it's like, what does that bar mean? Why is it there? How do you justify it? And so if you can't justify it, and I'm sure these people can't, other than, well, I just felt that way. Okay, great. It just doesn't work well. So if you do a more meaningful assessment, such as exposed to, working, something along those lines, then people are going to have a better understanding of what that means, and they're going to view that assessment as being more believable and having more credibility than some bar graph assessment that it's like, okay, what metrics did you use? How do you quantify that? How did you know how long that bar should be? You don't even want somebody asking that question or even having that thought in their head when they're looking at your resume. So I just avoid that altogether. So in this particular case, other than unfortunately it has the same silly bar stuff going on down here, which I completely disagree with, as you can tell, I would go with this iconic format. It's basic, it's simple, it has just one field, one column where things are listed out. It would be easy for algorithms to extract the information. It's easy for somebody to look at and be able to read quite quickly and get the information they need about you. And I think that this kind of format is just going to work better. So here I definitely agree with Boulder, because that was kind of their format as well, was just this nice, simple format. I would keep my resume, and actually I have kept my resume using this nice, simple format. So with that, hopefully you now have a better understanding of what the resume is all about, how it works in the job hunting process. some of the pitfalls of working with a resume, uh, and that some of those pitfalls are really either kind of painting yourself in too glowing of a light or not painting yourself in enough of a glowing light. But nonetheless, having a thread going through your resume that really makes the argument that you're the best candidate for a particular position. And then maybe reinforcing that resume with a cover letter. So with that, we will call this particular video lecture a wrap.